Hey friends, welcome to Peace and Power, the peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, the power of the Holy Spirit to change your world. And this week we are wrapping up our Bible study on the book of Ruth. And not only are we studying the book of Ruth, but we are learning how to study Scripture by studying the book of Ruth, learning how to study the Bible through our study of the book of Ruth. We are wrapping this up, so we are in the last chapter of Ruth. And if you remember, this is kind of the outline we've been working through. Ruth is a 4-act story. We looked at the introduction and the genealogy. We've talked about the journey and how that introduced the conflict. We talked about the harvest and how that showed off the characters of and introduced us to the character of Boaz, but also displayed the character of Ruth. Then we looked at the proposal, and that was the dramatic climax of the story, and how both those characters, Ruth and Boaz, showed their true nobility in what could have been a compromising situation. Now we have the fourth and final chapter of this book, and you could call it the wedding or the arrangements, because it's not necessarily the wedding, but it's the process of getting to the wedding. And with that, this one term comes up quite a bit in all of Ruth, but especially it's prominent for the fourth and final chapter, and that's the kinsman redeemer. But let's actually look at an outline of chapter 4. There is the bulk of the chapter, the beginning of the chapter, and I know how 2 and 3 were split the same way. This is going to run a little bit different, out of the norm. There's the negotiations, and these negotiations happen between Boaz and this other unnamed closer kinsman redeemer. And it's these negotiations of who will redeem the property and who will marry the Moabitess named Ruth. Interestingly enough, the character Ruth is basically only talked about in this passage. We don't have anything she says. And Naomi, although she is talked to in this passage, she is not necessarily the main character of this particular part either. It is all the action revolves around Boaz and his negotiations with this other kinsman redeemer. Then in the 13 through 17, we have what I've termed the happily ever after, but basically the summary of the wedding and the children and how Naomi's conflict is resolved through the actions of Boaz, this kinsman redeemer. And then it ends with the genealogy, this 10-person genealogy starting with Perez and ending with David. And the very last words of the book of Ruth, the very last word of the book of Ruth, is David. Now, right now, we are going to study and look at this idea of the kinsman redeemer. And we're going to look at some passages in Leviticus and one in Deuteronomy that are important for understanding the context of what's going on in chapter 4 of Ruth. First, just to bring it up, Leviticus 19, 9 through 10 is the description of what it means to glean the fields, how you're supposed to leave the edges of your fields unharvested so that widows, orphans, and those without substantial means can come up and glean them. It was to provide for those who didn't have any other way to get food. I bring that up because it points to, in chapter 2, points to the fact that at least Boaz kept that part of the law. So the law was something Boaz knew, something he practiced. And he kept it in so much as his foreman understood that he was going to keep this law as well. So Boaz is presented as a lawkeeper, and reading Leviticus 19, 9 through 10, you can see how those instructions match up with what we see in Ruth chapter 2. Then we have these passages in Leviticus 25, and these are about the redemption of property, which is what Boaz engages the other kinsman redeemer about at the very beginning. Let me read some of these verses. This is Leviticus 25, verse 10. You are to consecrate the 50th year and proclaim freedom in the land for all its inhabitants. It will be your jubilee when each of you is to return to his property, and each of you is to his clan. And then going down to verse 13, in this year of Jubilee, each of you will return to his property. If you make a sale to your neighbor or a purchase from him, do not cheat one another. You are to make the purchase from your neighbor based on the number of years since the last Jubilee. He is to sell you based on the number of remaining harvest years. You are to increase its price in proportion to the greater amount of years and decrease its price in proportion to the lesser amount of years, because what he is selling to you is a number of harvests. You are not to cheat one another, but fear your God, for I am the Lord your God. So property sales in the Old Testament in this time were not complete sales. They were complete sales up to this 50th year of Jubilee. Then the property would revert back to the original clan. Now, however, there's this piece of the kinsman redeemer, which comes up in Leviticus 25 and 23. Oh, and that piece seems to be important because it seems that Elimelech, before leaving to Moab, under some circumstances, sold his clan inheritance property to someone, and this entire conversation is about buying that property back from redeeming that property and buying it back from whoever Elimelech sold it to. 23. The land is not to be permanently sold because it is mine, and you are only foreigners and temporary residents on my land. You are to allow the redemption of any land you occupy. If your brother becomes destitute and sells part of his property, his nearest relative may come and redeem what his brother has sold. If a man has no family redeemer, but he prospers and obtains enough to redeem his land, he may calculate the year since his sale and repay the balance to the man he sold it to, and return to his property. But if he cannot attain enough to repay him, what he sold will remain in possession of its purchasers until the year of Jubilee. It is to be released at the Jubilee so that he may return to his property. But houses and villages that have no walls around them are to be classified as open fields. The right to redeem such houses stay in effect, and they are to be released at the Jubilee. So we see this idea that, and putting it in the context of Ruth, Elimelech must have sold some property. Now, that property would have been returned to Elimelech's family or heir upon the year of Jubilee. We have no clue how far away that year of Jubilee was. But someone, the Elimelech's brother or close kin, could buy back the property at any time to redeem it and return it to whoever Elimelech's heir was. Now the problem is Elimelech didn't have a necessary heir. There was no man in Elimelech's lineage to inherit this land at the year of Jubilee or to redeem it back. So somebody has to step in that is a close relative, but not necessarily the the brother or the son of Elimelech. And that's what we see going on in the book of Ruth. We see Boaz is a close relative. This other guy is a close relative. Neither of them are necessarily brothers or sons, but they are going to step in and on Naomi's behalf, for her sake, they are going to redeem the land. However, interestingly, the thing that's not mentioned there at all is widows or marriage or keeping the name alive. This is all about returning property to those who have sold it, needed to sell it. Deuteronomy 5:10 is the place, Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, is the place where we get into this idea of marriage. And it's called the levirate marriage, and it's interesting. It's way out of context for us. So just read this with your this is a different culture sort of ears on. When brothers live on the same property and one of them dies without a son, the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family. Her brother-in-law is to take her as his wife, have sexual relations with her, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law for her. The first son she bears will carry on the name of the dead brother, so his name will not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law, she must go to the elders at the city gate and say, "My brother-in-law refuses to preserve his brother's name as Israel. He isn't willing to perform the duty of a brother-in-law for me." The elders of his city will summon him and speak with him. If he persists and says, "I don't want to marry her," then his sister-in-law will go up to him in the sight of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, and spit in his face. Then she will declare, "This is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's house." And his family name in Israel will be called the house of the man whose sandal was removed. So here's where we get into the marriage piece. But this is all about brothers. This isn't about close kin, and this has no property redemption tied to it at all. So it's interesting to see how in the book of Ruth, the town of Bethlehem, Boaz, Naomi, and everybody else seem to have been interpreting these laws for the betterment, for the sake of Naomi. So basically what's happening is Naomi is searching for someone to redeem the property for her. That someone, Boaz steps up to be that someone, but there is somebody else who has a closer connection. He turns it down. Boaz also, as the redeemer of the property, is taking upon himself to marry Ruth and prolong the family name of Elimelech and Mahlon. So we have two different sets of laws being applied to this situation in a way that is more the spirit of the law than an exact interpretation of those laws. But it is fascinating how that plays out and understanding what the kinsman redeemer is in the Pentateuch in Leviticus and Deuteronomy helps us understand what is actually going on in chapter 4. Hope that was helpful as you're looking through chapter 4. Hope that kind of sums up some of the details about what's going on there. And as we do that, just remember there's always two ways to join. You can join live on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time via Zoom, or these weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and WordPress. We have social media, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, and YouTube. The links will be in the description below. Thanks for joining, and I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.